Welcome to Networking RX, a podcast devoted to helping business professionals like you enhance your networking skills in order to become more proficient giving and receiving quality business referrals and improving the overall quality of your life and the lives of those around you. The Networking RX podcast is a production of AmSpirit Business Connections, an organization whose mission is to empower business success through networking.
For those who don't know, and I've shared it, but if you haven't heard, I grew up in a little town in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, 4 hours north of Green Bay. I consider my hometown. I love it. It's called Houghton. Wonderful winter wonderland. They get about 300 inches of snow a year. How did I end up there? I ended up there because my father got a job teaching at the university there, Michigan Tech University. It's Michigan Technological University. It's not a technical school. It's an engineering school. And so I had the great privilege, if you will, of going to school with a lot of sons and daughters of professors, other professors at the college, really smart people, metallurgical engineers, electrical engineers, chemical engineers, just a ton of smart people. In fact, I joke about it because the starting offensive line for the football team I played on, Houghton High School, Go Gremlins, was a lot of sons of college professors. We got our butts kicked because we'd go up against the prison wardens' kids or the prison guard kids and the shipbuilder kids, and we were just a bunch of scrawny, sons of college professors. But I know that, in that experience that there were just, there was always the conversation in high school about, okay, who's smart, who can do this? What'd you do on the SAT, ACT, all this stuff? And it seemed to really matter to me, and it mattered to me all the way through college, and it mattered to me up through law school and graduate business school. Learn, be really smart. But then I stopped and I looked back and looked at the people that I'd gone to high school with, certainly people in the graduate programs. There was always the one or two people who were just super intelligent that couldn't get a job. And even now I look back and there are people who are, wow, you were really smart. Is that all you've ever done? And then we start to hear about the notion of emotional intelligence. It's not IQ, it's EQ. And so today I have on the program, I have Phil Johnson. I'm lucky to have Phil on today. I ran into him. We met with one another. Excuse me. He's the founder and CEO of Master of Business Leadership, of the Master of Business Leadership program, MBL for short. And it's been an awakening success. It has been awakening success in entrepreneurs and executives for 31 years with billions in career revenues. Just, think about, what that leadership, what emotional intelligence will do. And the MBL alumni live around the world, the United States, Canada, UK, Europe, Japan, Germany, Bosnia, name a country, Middle East, Far East, all over. And so Phil is joining us today. We're going to kick around the notion of emotional intelligence, how it's developed, and better yet, what gets in its way. What keeps people from doing their best with emotional intelligence? Phil, welcome to the program.
Well, thanks, Frank. It's an honor. I hope I can live up to that introduction.
Well, you will. You will. Well, okay. What got you interested in emotional intelligence?
Well, that's a great question. I've actually been on this path for 55 years. And the month after next, I'm going to turn 70. So it's been quite a journey. But I was born with dyslexia. And because back in those days, there was no such thing as dyslexia, ADD, or ADHD. But it forced me to do a lot of what I now refer to as emotional labor, because my brain doesn't work the way most people's brains work. And that helped to prepare me for what I do now. But it was really the death of my mother in 1967, just after I turned 14, that really got me on this path, and I've kind of been on this path ever since. And that was 55 years ago. I had a short stint in the semiconductor industry for 20 years. I left as an executive, traveling about 60,000 miles a year throughout North America and the Pacific Rim. I'm done traveling, by the way. So I really realized the need for and the value of the development of our emotional intelligence. It's interesting that your comments about being around high IQ individuals. I can relate to that. And there's a saying that um, IQ without EQ has proven historically to be quite destructive. And there was actually a 40-year study done at UC Berkeley comparing IQ with EQ by a bunch of professors there. And they concluded that emotional intelligence was 400% more valuable in determining success than intellectual intelligence. And I actually think that number's low. I think it's actually much higher than that. But we're being forced, because of the accelerating rate of global change, to develop our emotional intelligence. And as you've kind of said in your opening remarks, that our educational system really hasn't done that, and neither is our employment system, because it's focused primarily on the development of, or the not development, on intellectual labor, and has done little to develop our emotional intelligence.
Yeah, I think we got on this path in the 60s when the space race began, because there was a huge push for the math and science, the STEMs, the STEM education. And it's, not to blame anybody, but that was just kind of a point in time where it's like, okay, this is where the world's going. We're going into space. We're going into computers. And so there was a lot of focus on those sorts of things. And we hadn't ever talked about emotional intelligence in that term in the past, but prior to that, there was more of an emphasis on what I'll call the finishing skills of talking and being cordial to one another and human interaction and stuff like that. But it just seems to me that was, looking back, that was a critical turn. You could see it in the educational system. It's my father got a job at Michigan Tech. He was a professor of education. He wasn't an engineer, but he was basically taking the people who didn't want to get into engineering and teaching them how to be educators and get out into high schools, teaching science, technology, all those sorts of things. So anyhow, talk to me about emotional intelligence. How do you define it? How do we develop it? How do we use it more?
Those are three great questions. Let me try and answer them. Emotional intelligence, whenever we take an action that moves us outside of our comfort zone, there's a part of our old lizard brain called the amygdala that's been trying to keep us safe and alive for the last 500 million years by making sure we never leave the security of our cave. And if we do, it automatically triggers the release of a hormone into our bloodstream called cortisol. And that causes the executive center of our brain, our prefrontal cortex, where intellect and creativity reside, to shut off. And we go into what psychologists refer to as an amygdala hijack. Some people lash out, some people run away, some people freeze like a deer in the headlights. When that happens in conflict situations, people die. And when it happens in business or personal situations, relationships die. We burn trust. So that analogy, if you think of your amygdala as a very frightened 4-year-old child the development of our emotional intelligence acts like a big brother or a big sister to quiet the amygdala response down and better enable us to feel the fear and anxiety that change and innovation always triggers in us, and be able to move through it towards what it is we're trying to achieve, as opposed to allowing that fear and anxiety to keep us trapped in our comfort zone. So we're facing a tsunami of rapidly accelerating global change. We're living in a time where some scientists estimate that in this century, we could experience the equivalent of 20,000 years worth of change, or 200 centuries worth of change. To kind of put that into perspective, a 10-year-old child today, by the time they're 60, will be experiencing a year's worth of change in 11 minutes.
Wow.
So, and we have this 500 million year old brain that doesn't like change, whether it's good change or bad change. We don't like change. So we really need to be developing our emotional intelligence to be able to deal with the fear and anxiety that rapidly accelerating change triggers in us. Does that help?
Yeah, no, it does. I mean, it does. One of the questions I have gotten over the years, related but unrelated, or unrelated but related. What do you think LinkedIn's going to do to networking? What do you think, whatever social, I'm not asking you, these questions have been asked of me. And my response has always been nothing. We still interact with one another. The human part of us is still the same. All LinkedIn does is it just facilitates, or the internet facilitates well, Phil, the ability of us to talk. You're near Toronto. I'm in Columbus, Ohio.
Yeah.
But, you trusted me enough to come on the program, and I trusted you enough to bring you on. Technology, that feeling of trust, that feeling of comfort with each other has not changed.
I think you're actually hitting on a really excellent point. And the real challenge we have going forward in this century is to develop our awareness and connectedness with ourselves and each other. And in order for us to be able to do that, we have to be able to distance ourselves from the fear and anxiety that our ego-based fears create in us. And we've really had no training to develop that capability, and we're going to need it more than ever. So it's interesting. Let me give you an analogy of the kind of a numeric analogy between the difference between IQ and EQ. Think of IQ as somebody giving you $10,000 a day for 31 days. So at the end of 31 days, you've got $310,000. Think of emotional intelligence as a penny that doubles in value every day. So day one, you have a penny. Day two, you have two pennies. Day 31, you've got $10.7 million. Day 40, you've got over 5 billion. Day 50, you've got over 5 trillion. See, not everybody can have 160 IQ. If you have a high IQ, your parents had a high IQ, their parents had a high IQ, and you simply inherited those genes. You didn't develop it.
Right.
But everybody can develop their emotional intelligence, and the ROI is massively greater than intellectual intelligence.
And that's what I have told my kids through the years is like, yes, study, learn. Your real superpower will be your ability to relate to others. There'll always be room in this world for people who can relate to others.
And in order to be able to relate to others, you have to stop giving away your energy. And I'll explain what I mean by that in a minute. And I'll give you an example of a company that's currently valued at over $3 trillion, and they're doing over $600 billion a year in revenue. That's doing exactly what I'm about to describe. You see, we're only actually conscious about 3 to 5% of the time. The rest of the time, we're relying on our unconscious habits to determine the bulk of our behavior and our results. But when we're born, we're not born with a conscious mind. We don't start to become conscious until we're about a year or so old. And we are born with an unconscious mind. And we immediately start wiring up our brain, creating the neural network pathways in our brain that become our habits in order to survive and fit in. And a lot of those habits unconsciously cause us to give away our energy. And we do it in lots of different ways: how we communicate, listen, take responsibility, make decisions, all sorts of ways. But when we're unconsciously giving away our energy, it creates an energy deficit in us. So at the same time we're unconsciously giving away our energy over here, we have to be trying to replace that energy by trying to steal energy from other people over here. And that dynamic is going on inside of everybody, everywhere, all over the world, all the time. And that is the root cause of all drama, chaos, and conflict, war everywhere. So what I do in the MBL program is I show people how they're unconsciously giving away their energy, and I give them better habits to practice to stop doing that. And when you stop giving away your energy, your need to steal the energy of other people goes away because you don't need it. And it's in that process that you become a more inspirational leader, you develop your emotional intelligence, you become more conscious of what's going on in you and around you, which frees you from your ego-based fears, which leads to higher levels of trust and engagement, which guarantees, underline, guarantees career, corporate, and personal success. So, why isn't everybody in the world working to develop their emotional intelligence? And the answer is, A, we don't know what we don't know, and B, it's harder than hell. It's like Navy SEAL training for our emotions. We have significant both biological and sociological resistance to change. The one I mentioned, the amygdala that never wants us to leave our comfort zone. The second biological source of resistance we have to change is our existing habits. Once we develop a habit, it's there forever. It's a neural network pathway in our brain we've created through our actions, repeated actions. And although we can develop new habits at any age, better habits at any age, those new habits, it's called brain plasticity or neurogenesis. Those new habits are always going to be weaker than the old habits because when we're younger, there's an insulation layer that goes around the neural network pathway called myelin. And when we're younger, it's thicker than when we're older. So there's going to be an ongoing internal battle for control between the old and new habits. The third source of resistance is sociological, meaning that the people around us don't want us to change. Because if we change and start to get better results, maybe they're going to have to change, and that scares the hell out of them. And the best way to ensure they don't have to change is to make sure we fail so they can say, look, I told you so, now get your head down and come back into the herd with the rest of us. So unless you have an emotional connection to something you want to achieve, a vision of your desired results that's greater than the fear and anxiety that's going to get triggered in you when you step outside of your comfort zone in pursuit of that result. You may want better results than you're currently getting, but you will not be willing to do the emotional labor that getting better results requires. And quite frankly, most people aren't. So if they're not willing to change themselves, the only alternative they have is try and change everybody else. That they often use some type of position-based power to control, manipulate others to get them to change. And that's why the current level of employee engagement, according to Gallup, is 13%. Low levels of employee engagement or toxic work environments are costing the U.S. economy over $1 trillion a year. So it's really a lack of emotional intelligence that's creating the drama, chaos, and conflict that we're seeing everywhere. And because of the accelerating rate of global change, we have to be developing our emotional intelligence to be able to navigate our way through the fear and anxiety that change triggers in us. So more and more companies are hiring, developing, and promoting largely based on emotional intelligence. So that company I mentioned earlier that's doing over $3 trillion, that's valued at over $3 trillion, and is doing about $600 billion a year in revenues, primary hiring focus is emotional intelligence. That company is Apple. That's why when you walk into an Apple store, the energy you feel is an example of a more emotionally intelligent environment. They're not trying to sell you anything. They're trying to understand your pain and, if possible, offer a solution to your pain. They want you to have a great experience, and maybe you'll tell your friends and they'll tell their friends. And if you think about it, the way you feel in that environment, the energy you feel in that environment is a very different energy from the energy coming out of the stores surrounding that environment. So that represents the next stage in our human evolution. We have to evolve beyond simply intellectual ability, and we have to be developing our emotional intelligence. And our emotional intelligence becomes the gateway to keeping our intellectual ability conscious and available to us, so that as we're experiencing this rapid change, it doesn't trigger an amygdala hijack. One other little note. So let's say Einstein's IQ was around 160, which is genius level IQ. Within the next 2 to 3 years, it's estimated that AI will have an IQ of over 1,000. So our ability to do intellectual labor is no longer going to be our get out of jail card that it has been historically. The real focus on success in the 21st century and connectedness with ourselves and others is the development of our emotional intelligence. It's not intellectual intelligence.
Well, I think we've seen that through the years, Phil, in that advancements have reduced the need for eliminated the need for certain things, right? I mean, you know, we don't need to shoe horses. I mean, there are some people do it, but at the rate, because we have cars. You know, when was the last time you took your car in for a tune-up? You don't, because of advancements. The spreadsheet, you know, eliminated bookkeeping type work, opened the door for analyst type work, which is a higher form of understanding. But even people doing analyst work, they have to know what they're looking at. It becomes it becomes more right brain, right, as opposed to left brain of, okay, profits and losses. Okay, well, I want to understand why profits and losses, and this, so it's a little off of from what you're talking about, but essentially there's the point I'm trying to make is to following on to your point is that our intellect is not going to be as necessary as it once was. I think
it's yeah. I think the real challenge before us isn't an intellectual challenge, because AI is going to be able to do anything we can do intellectually better, faster, and cheaper than we can. And it's estimated the next 5 to 10 years, over 60% of jobs will be replaced by AI, and a lot of those white collar jobs. And that's really going to, in a sense, force us or give us the ability, the time to focus on our humanity, to focus on developing our emotional intelligence. And quite frankly, that's been lacking for a very long time. That's why we live in the world we live in. In relative terms, humanity's been on the planet for less than a half of 1 second. And in that time, we've destroyed the climate. We're facing things like CRISPR-Cas9, gene editing technology, AI, other pandemics. And there isn't a single other species on the planet that wouldn't be better off if humanity didn't exist. We're the virus on the planet, and we simply have to evolve for our survival. And the nature of that evolution, the next stage in our human evolution, is the development of our emotional intelligence.
All right. We're running short on time here. What's one exercise? I want people to contact you and learn about MBL. But what's one exercise that somebody could do to work on their emotional intelligence? What's, something they can do?
Stop equating how they feel about themselves based on how others feel about them.
Okay.
How somebody feels about you has nothing to do with you. It has to do with what's going on inside of them. But if how you feel about yourself is based on how anybody feels about you, you're giving away your energy unconsciously to them to determine how you should feel about yourself. If you like me, I like me. If you don't like me, I don't like me. And as crazy as that sounds, what I've just described is all of social media. We bend over backwards to get people to like us so that we can feel better about ourselves. And that's just one of the many ways we're unconsciously giving away our energy, and that's creating the subsequent need to create the drama and chaos that enables us to steal the energy of others.
Great. People listening, how can they help you? How can they get a hold of you?
They can reach me. I think I've given you the link to my Zoom calendar. I'd be happy to meet with and continue the discussion with anybody that has an interest in developing their emotional intelligence.
Okay. I will get that in. I'll get that in the show notes.
Great.
This has been very enlightening. I'm going to stop worrying about what other people think. There's my new mantra.
Good for you.
Thanks for joining us today.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks for joining us on the Networking RX podcast. Please put what you've learned into action today and let us know if you have questions, comments, or ideas for future topics. You can email them to us at podcast@amspirit.com. That's AMSPIRIT.com. Finally, so you never miss an episode, be sure to subscribe to the Networking RX podcast through iTunes, Overcast, or however you receive your podcasts. Now get out and network with someone.
The Networking RX podcast is the copyright production of AmSpirit Business Connection. All rights reserved.